Hello, everybody, and welcome to another great episode of My EdTech Life. I am excited to be here with you all today. Thank you so much for joining us wherever in the world it is that you may be. I appreciate you making us part of your day or maybe well into the evening or depending on where you are in the world. Just thank you as always for all of your support. We appreciate all your likes, shares, follows. Thank you so much for all the comments and the emails, and as always, we do what we do because we're passionate about bringing some amazing voices and some amazing perspectives into the education landscape. And I am excited about today's podcast, as I am about every podcast, because I always learn so much from our guests. But I am definitely excited about today's podcast because I have a fellow podcaster who is on the show who also has a podcast where he talks about AI and AI in education. So it's great to just be able to connect with another like minded educator, like minded podcaster, somebody that's really seen what is happening in the education landscape, and then just, sharing reflections, sharing news, and bringing on some amazing guests that we can all learn from. So I would love to welcome to the show Mr. Daniel Lopez. Mr. Daniel, how are you this evening?
Alfonso, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here and I'm doing great.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And like I said, I know we talked about this in the pre chat, but definitely a fan of your show. And if you can, guys, all of you guys listening, please make sure that you follow Daniel's podcast at the AI Ed Convo. Please make sure you follow him on Twitter and make sure you subscribe to his podcast because he definitely brings some great podcast news, some amazing guests, and some great perspectives because Daniel is going to tell us a little bit about his background and where he's currently working. And, he kind of sees things, in a different way than I would, in the K-12 space. He sees things maybe at a little bit bigger angle, bigger, in a bigger space. So I'm excited to make sure that I learn from him, but I know that you guys will definitely take a lot from him today. So let's go ahead and jump in. So Daniel, can you please just give us a little introduction, and your context in education?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would consider myself a lifelong educator. I mean, I think education, working in schools has really been in my blood since I've grown up. Growing up, my mom was an educator. She wasn't a teacher, but she currently works and continues to work as a kind of like the head secretary in a middle school. And just growing up, I mean, she always emphasized the importance of education in me. And I think growing up, I was kind of like reluctant to really jump in and acknowledge that I was going to have a path of education. But then when I got to college and had that experience, I realized that I was really good at reading, writing, and speaking, and I wanted to help people. And when I deduced that politics wasn't for me, I found my way towards, I think, like a lot of people, towards education and realizing that that's a tremendous vehicle for helping young people, for helping to change the world. And since then I've been catapulted into a lot of different experiences in education and a lot of different places. And I think I've been just so lucky to have the experiences that I've had. I was a eighth grade English language arts teacher in Houston for a couple of years. And then that made me realize that I really love working with students, but I hate teaching English. Some of those days where I'm waking up and at 7 a.m. had to pretend to show students that I'm really interested in poetry was just not my jam and not something that got me out of bed. And as I reflected more on my journey, I realized that what I really love to talk about is college access. I love talking to kids about college. I love helping students to go through the college process and to just really figure out what they want to do after high school. And then that led me on a path towards a really amazing college access organization in Houston called Emerge, which supports students from marginalized communities with gaining access to selective colleges and universities throughout the country. I was there for many years, both as a direct kind of advisor working with students in a lot of different Houston ISD high schools. HISD, just for context, is one of the largest districts in the country, and they have close to 50 high schools. So I got a chance to see a lot of different schools, big schools, small schools, kind of more magnet facing schools, large comprehensive schools. Then I was able to manage that team. And then my wife and I decided we want to move back to the East Coast. I originally went to Boston University, and so made my way back to the East Coast. And now I've been with OneGoal and have had the opportunity, very similar to Houston, to be able to see college access with their program on a bigger scale, being able to work with school leaders across the state of Massachusetts and seeing a lot of different school contexts, and now urban, suburban, and now rural communities as well. So I've been very privileged to just see a lot of different schools in a lot of different spaces and a lot of different contexts and in a lot of different states.
That is great. And you know what? One thing that I love is, like you said, that opportunity and the students that you're working with, and the future, pretty much getting them prepared and making sure that they do follow in that secondary or post-secondary education and so on, which is so important. Which is one thing that I love, that when I started listening to your podcast, and I was like, wow, the way that you share those experiences. And I'm gonna, pick a couple of things from your podcast as we, kind of go into the rest of the conversation. But before we get into that, I want to know, it's like, when or how did this interest for AI come about, and for you to say, you know what, I am going to go ahead and start a podcast around, this technology. So tell me a little bit about that story.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I mean, it is mind blowing to me that it is now April and I have a podcast around AI and education, and I'm doing this because I think if you'd had asked me 4.5 months ago what I thought about AI, I didn't care at all about AI. I mean, when you asked me about AI, I thought we were talking about these like little robots that kind of seemed like they were stumbling when they were walking and didn't really seem like they were anywhere near close. So what it was, you hear all of these folks talking about their theories that if we develop AI, it's going to be like Terminator Judgment Day and end the world. And that was kind of my impression of AI. And then, I started watching these videos on YouTube during my winter break, just kind of reflecting on the year ahead. And all of a sudden, I start to see this thing called Chat GPT. And I was hearing that this is artificial intelligence. And so I'm like, Chad, this looks kind of cool. Like, you can play around with the search app and ask it everything I'm interested in. So I immediately made an account. I started playing with it, and it just blew my mind. I mean, I feel like I saw education, and I saw a world that existed in education that I didn't even think was possible. It completely just shattered my vision of what I thought AI was and what it could look like and what it could sound like, and just what the experience could be. And I mean, for about a week, I was just totally obsessed with interacting with ChatGPT, asking it questions, playing with it, pushing it to the limits, and just trying to see the many ways that I could use the tool and explore with it. And I mean, I was going to bed just thinking about questions I could ask it. I couldn't sleep. Like, I was just thinking about this so much. And then I just was asking myself, like, I have the privilege of talking to principals across Massachusetts, and it has never been harder than it is now to work in schools. Working in schools right now is a very, very challenging environment. There's people who leave the field all the time. Every single person who's currently in a school usually has 5 jobs. They are truly just, such it's such a thankless endeavor currently, and the people who do it are just, I'm so grateful for all of the people who invest in like working in schools to serve our young people and to do all of the work that it is. And I was like, why this technology can help them. This technology can help them do their jobs. There's ways, I know that it can make the life of a teacher, the life of a school leader, the life of our students better. Right now there's just so many issues, and at that moment I just felt like I need to find a way to make these things click. In my experience, oftentimes the challenge that I have found in education is one of the biggest challenges is just educators don't really talk to each other, right? You don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the time in a school day. You have a tsunami of priorities, challenges, obstacles in your way, and you just don't have time to do it. So I'm like, how can I find a way to bridge together technology that I truly think is going to change the world for the good, with a field that I know that I care about and I love so much that I know can change the world for our young people? How can I try to reduce that bandwidth for our teachers? And that's where my inspiration was to start a podcast. I was terrified. I had to watch a lot of YouTube videos to just learn how to get started, but I was like, I just believe in this a lot, and I'm going to put myself out there and see what happens.
Well, that's great, because I am thankful that you did push yourself out there and you just decided to click record, because now you are 13 episodes in. Is that correct?
Yeah.
13
Mhm.
episodes in. I know that's I was listening to today. And like I said, I look for it every week. I'm like, hey, at my drive home, I'm like, hey, and I already have it ready to go and queued up amongst my other podcasts that I listen to. But I just love how you bring the news and just those different perspectives. And again, seeing things from in your neck of the woods and now where you are currently working, it's always important to see and dive in because many people aren't aware. I mean, sometimes, like you said, we are just siloed as educators. We don't talk to anybody else. And sometimes we're just there on our own and we don't, share, we don't, look for community or anything. And I think that's something that is so important. And another thing that you mentioned is a lot of educators that are deciding to leave the profession and it just makes it very difficult. So why not kind of start thinking about these technologies as something that could be helpful in that teacher shortage? And you know what, it's been 3 episodes in a row, including this one, where I've had educators. We had Stefan Bouchard, then we had Alex Cotran, who I know you had on as a guest too as well, and now yourself talking about that teacher shortage. And I know Stefan also mentioned and Alex mentioned, some of these technologies. I mean, if we have that teacher shortage, this is a tool that might be there to help. And then Stefan even went as far as interviewing and speaking to educators in countries where they don't have enough teachers, where they don't even have enough resources or computers or one-to-one devices, that they're hungry for this technology because it's the only way that those students might get some form of information or get that some of that education that it is that they need. So we're in a very interesting situation right now, because of AI and seeing the potential that it has. But also, we know that we need to be very cautious and very careful. So I want to know, just I know based on your episodes, you when you talked about the picture with the Pope and the puffer jacket too as well, like and some of these pictures, what based on that you saw, and I know you kind of had a just a little bit of sharing your thoughts on that. What are some of the potential risks that you yourself see that you can share with us?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's quite a few risks, and I'll try to, save doing the same redundant ones about privacy or data, those things, which, I think are all important. But I'll highlight one that I recently have learned about, which actually kind of scared me, but also equally excited me. So we'll have to see kind of where it falls. But I was actually listening to a podcast episode of Hard Fork from the New York Times, and they were talking about a recent Stanford case study that had been done around AI agents. So, we've talked a lot about AI tools and, what a tool is. And yeah, Chat GPT, the great thing about a chatbot like that is it can do something really cool, like write an essay instantaneously. It can do a lot of things that you command. What we have talked a little bit less about, which I definitely want to talk more about in future episodes of my own podcast, is something that I'm learning about called these AI agents, which essentially is that they are AI bots models that actually work even when they are not being when a user hasn't inquired about something, right? They're autonomous working bots. And so in this Stanford case study that they'd done, they had created this kind of like Sim City, if you will, called Smallville. And they had essentially created 30 AI bots that were essentially asked to take on the personality of people. So they had John, and they told John, like in the script, this is your personality, this is how you act, this is your job, this is your wife, all of these things. And they did that with 30 different personas. And then they asked them to essentially play out simulations, like play out a simulation of you all talking in a park, working through this. And they just kind of monitored their progress over time. And what they found is that there was a lot of very interesting behaviors that started to manifest with these bots that were just autonomous bots working through. One of the things that they noticed is that they were gossiping. So they started, as an example, one of the bots, let's just call him John for now, ended up deciding that he was going to run for mayor. Mind you, this is just an AI query that's going through. And then the other bots started having a conversation about John running for mayor, and they started gossiping with each other about this experience. And I just thought that was a little scary. I mean, that the fact that these AI bots that are, again, running autonomously from an independent user and in a controlled setting, mind you, but for now, but that's kind of like as they were doing, are starting to replicate some of these behaviors that I don't really know that we would want from technology at this point, the behaviors such as like gossiping. And so I'm really worried, I think, because I don't think I fully understand yet where those kind of behaviors take us. So I think we just need to be very cautious at this particular point in time about putting a lot of faith into these AI agents. I think we really should try to enhance and perfect AI tools first. Things such as, being able to have personalized learning, where we're asking AI to replicate things in tech, to synthesize information, to do some of those things before we start to go to the next phase of this, which are these AI agents. Which I'm like, ooh, I don't know about that just yet. Well, maybe we need to hold on there.
And that is very interesting, like that you mentioned, because I know right now also just this past weekend also I discovered like Agent GPT, and there's other, websites like Cognizance, and of course you can take the, download it from GitHub and put it on your computer and just get your API key and there you go. But just how amazing it is, where before it's like, yes, you give Chat GPT a prompt, but now all you have to do is assign a task, and Agent GPT and Cognizance, they'll just go ahead and spit everything out, and they'll even talk to itself. It'll go ahead and do the research. It'll pop in links. It'll do certain things. And I tested it myself, just even with a podcast script just on AI and education. And it go ahead and fed me information. I did it with a lesson plan as a former fifth grade science teacher. I was like, I want to see a lesson on the water cycle and just how it went through it. And it gave me different variations of the lessons. Was just something that was amazing, with just the simple prompt of naming a science teacher, give me a lesson on the water cycle, and there it went to town. And I think that those tools definitely very helpful, but at the same time, like you said, we've got these agents, and I know it's a little different than what we're seeing here, but I mean, just that communication within the AI itself. And of course, we don't see it, we don't have that control over it. So what else can go ahead and take action after that? And so it's very interesting that you mentioned that. And I do agree with you. What you said is it would be great to take the time to really perfect some of these AI tools and really work with them in such a way that it is going to give us the results that we need, the help that we need. And I that kind of brings me into a segue. And one of your episodes, one of the things that I found so helpful, because you do work with a lot of students that are getting ready to go to college. And to me, there was an episode where you talked, I believe it was about a young lady who had just received an acceptance letter to go to a certain university. But of course, she wasn't too sure exactly, what all of the verbiage meant. And even to explain to parents, and especially if you're a language broker like myself growing up, I was a language broker. You maybe don't know how to explain those things to your parents. But I loved what you did, and to using Chat GPT. So I would love for you to share, give us the episode
Yeah.
number as well, so our audience members can go and check that out. But tell us a little bit about that story, because I found that very fascinating.
Yeah, I forget the exact episode number. It's probably like number 10 or 11. It's the one that is titled AI's Impacts Across Education. If anyone's curious, I also, on my Twitter and my LinkedIn, I posted the exact screenshots of the example that I posted so folks can actually like read the case study that I did. But man, it's kind of a tough story to tell, to be honest, just because it really broke my heart that this was the experience I had with this student. But essentially what I had talked about is, as a part of my work, just going to different high schools, with OneGoal, I had the opportunity to go to a high school under kind of like a lower performing high school in a more rural community of Massachusetts. And I was working with, in, kind of one of our classes that we have there, a senior, and she had received, she had received one, I should say, financial aid letter from a private institution in Massachusetts that she was really excited about going to. She had applied early action to this institution, and she, when I talked to her, the intention of our time that day was to support all of the students with analyzing their financial aid letters. Right? They had up to that point 3 different teachers in the classroom that year. Their initial teacher had decided to leave the classroom. They then had a longer term sub, and unfortunately that sub wasn't able to, I think, stick it out, or there was just some other piece there, and then there was another transition. So they have had a very disjointed experience in this class that they were supposed to have. At the same time, the counseling staff there, they're supposed to have 5 counselors for, the school size that they have. They were down to 2 just because they had a couple of, mid-year transitions as well. So they were a very understaffed high school. And as it related to direct college advising with students, a lot of that, students just didn't have a lot of the airtime that they have. So anyways, I'm working with this student. She has this letter. She's really excited. And, I'm asking her, like, have you looked at this letter? Are you feeling good about this? Like, are you, how are you feeling? She's like, yeah, I'm excited. I'm ready to go. It's all good. And so I'm looking at this letter. I'm first looking at the, the cost of attendance and From what I can gather, it's about $45,000 a year, including room and board to go to this institution. I'm like, okay. So we see that number. Then I'm starting to look at the grants and scholarships that they got and she got. And I'm looking at those, and they gave her, I think, about $20,000 to $25,000 of grants and scholarships. And then the rest of the financial aid that they offered was the Stafford and the federal loans that were offered. So that's approximately about $7,000 in aid that she has. So essentially, that's leaving her with a gap of about $13,000 to $15,000 that she's going to have to come up with in direct costs. So that's not even including laptops you're going to have to buy, winter clothes, books, right? All of those extra little things to be able to go. This is just like to be able to like get in the door that she's going to have to pay to go. And so, I go through this, I'm analyzing. So my initial thought is like, oh, I don't know. I mean, most of the students that I've generally worked with, if they have a gap over 5,000, I'm generally really worried for them. And so we always have conversations. So I start to ask her like, hey, do you know what your expected family contribution was when you filled out the FAFSA? And she's like, I'm not really sure at this point what that was. This was a predominantly Title I high school, so most of the students in there had usually an EFC, close to zero. So, my assumption at this point was likely that the family is not going to have $13,000 annually for her to be able to attend this institution. And then, I start to like really break this down to her and try to explain in simple terms, like, so you understand that it costs $45,000 to go here? Yeah. Okay. You understand that they're giving you $27,000 of free money. That's what this means, right? For these loans, this is money you have to pay back, right? And the nice thing about these loans is you don't have to pay anything back until you graduate, but you are going to have to pay this back, right? And it's going to have some interest on it. So we're kind of walking through some of these. And then I'm really trying to explain to her that she has about a $13,000 to $15,000 gap. And so I'm starting to ask her, like, do you know how you can pay for it? Have you and your mom or your family talked about a plan for being able to cover this, right? If you do a payment plan, you understand that that's probably going to be about a $2,000 to $3,000 payment per month. They're going to have to make, like, based on that, do you think that's affordable? Have your family ever told you a little bit about what they can contribute? And her response was that she felt like her family could contribute something, but she didn't know if it was going to be that much. So, I started to give her some homework. I told her, well, I definitely want you to like break this down and explain this to your mom, like we talked about it. I want you to also, I gave her an example of a financial aid appeal letter and said, hey, I want you to like write this letter. This is an example of how to do it. And I want you to immediately send this to the financial aid office and say, hey, I'm very interested in going to your school. You're my number one choice, but I can't go right now because I have a $13,000 gap. Can you do any better? Right. And negotiate that. And so I kind of explained to her how to do that. And I just was really worried though, because this, this was late March. So she has to make a decision May 1. So she has 4 weeks to come up with $13,000 essentially to go to this school, or she has to figure out alternative plans for a school that she was really excited about. And I just felt really, I empathized a lot for her situation at that moment. And my initial thought was like, I felt very frustrated about why no teacher at the school or why a counselor hadn't had this conversation with her yet, especially if she had applied early action, and she likely has been sitting on that letter for a little while now. But then I also like reminded myself there's like 10 people doing this work in this school with the class of like 300 to 400 kids. That's a lot of kids for a very small caseload of folks doing this work. And so then I really just started to think, like, again, going back to like my initial fascination, like how can ChatGPT, how could AI have helped remedy this situation? And so I just immediately went home. Again, I didn't customize my own AI bot or anything. I just went into ChatGPT, which is something anybody could have done. And then I did a little bit of prompting. So I did say, hey, ChatGPT, I want to do a role play with you, right? I want you to pretend like you're a counselor and that I'm a student applying to college for the very first time. I'm a first generation student, so I don't understand, some of these college terms. I need you to be very simple in your language and explain to me these things. I want you to help me analyze a financial aid letter. And so I kind of walked through the example almost exactly how I did with that student. So, but with the roles reversed, right? So the chatbot then asked me like, hey, so can you explain to me, what your letter looks like? And said, well, I don't understand it. And then the chatbot responded like, well, that's okay. First, look for a number that says this. And I'm like, okay, do you mean this number? Yes, that's right. And then it was kind of walking me through line by line, even not having seen the letter, and explaining to me. And I will say that it did a pretty good job. What I was actually very impressed with is the conversation was like at least 85% of what ours was. It wasn't that far off from my, and I have over 10 years of experience doing this work with students, and it wasn't that far off from how I advised this student through this situation. The second thing is, I also took all the screenshots of my conversation and I posted it in one of the largest college admissions Facebook groups on Facebook. And again, there's like 80,000 members in this group. And then I saw some reactions and everybody agreed. They were like, wow. There were some folks who were saying, wow, I don't think I'm going to have a job in 2 years. Wow, this is amazing. I hope that's not the case. But again, a lot of folks were just really very similar to myself, very surprised by the capacity for this AI bot to be able to replicate a pretty similar advising conversation to a pretty good degree. Again, without a person being there, without a real human being there. So I see a lot of capacity for it to be able to do things like that. What also really excites me about the development of some of these bots, which I know Chat GPT currently can't do, but I know GPT-4, the like model can, which is multimodal. So in the future, I probably don't even have to go through that. I probably could have just taken a picture of the letter, uploaded it, and it would have said, this is this, this is this, this is this, right? We kind of had to have a dialogue because it couldn't see the letter. But if it could have saw the letter, I bet you it would have done it even faster for that. So I see a lot of potential for it to be able to be a tool for educators there. Now, if I'm one teacher in the classroom, I have to have this conversation with 30 students in my class. It makes it a lot easier for me to be able to do that with all the students simultaneously, rather than having to sit down 25 minutes with each one individually, walking through their very sensitive individual circumstances and having these conversations.
Man, and like I said, that use case, when I heard you, I was driving home, I was like, let me pause this and just take it all in, because I mean, that just the way that we see it used, and in this way, the way that you applied it was just something that was amazing. And just the feedback that you got, and most importantly too, I mean, the response that you got from that group, and them thinking like, yeah, that's kind of exactly what I would have done, or the conversation I would have had. But like you mentioned, schools are full of students, and sometimes you only have maybe two counselors for 700 kids, or it all depends, even in the high school, for financial aid officers that they may have there, and so on. And then to talk to all those kids, I mean, it's almost impossible, like you said. And so, yeah, this is an amazing use case. And we've got Sherry who's joining us here on LinkedIn. So Sherry says, this is an amazing application of technology in real world situation. I am very impressed. Thank you, Sherry, so much for joining us. We also have Josh Tobar, who's joining us, MPA Jaguars. Thank you so much, as always, my friend, for joining us here in the chat. All right. So, Daniel, now I want to know a little bit more about what you're thinking right now, just from what you have seen. And obviously, the news, you're kind of seeing this week by week as you report it to us also through your podcast. But what is it that maybe in your eyes you're going to see, or you feel that this technology is headed into, as far as maybe in your line of work too, and in the education system here? Or first of all, let me take that back. Massachusetts, that's where you said that you're currently living, right? Okay. So I want
Yeah.
to know, just here from my perspective here in Texas, like at least in my district, I haven't seen much of like, hey, we're going to ban this, we're going to do this, and so on. What has it been like, at least for the districts that you've been working with over there in Massachusetts? What are the initial reactions? Are there any principals that are taking some action plans, superintendents, or anything at all because of what they have seen?
Yeah, that's very similar to your experience. That's been my experience over here in Mass as well. I've actually had a couple of principals and school leaders on my podcast
Yeah.
as well. And I've asked them, like, are you talking about this in your district, in your schools? And unfortunately, the answer from both of them was no. And I can understand why, just because for any folks who work in education, you kind of know that you don't really get to talk about new things until the summer, right? The way that a school year works, if you work in a school, is you do a lot of like your strategic planning during the summer. You roll out any new initiatives, new projects, new processes during the summer going into the school year. And then for 9 months, I mean, you're kind of working with that, right? You're maybe doing some refinements or enhancements, but you're not going back to opening up under the hood and significantly revamping any type of systems or things in the short term. So it didn't surprise me at all that the initial reaction from a lot of school districts when tools like this came out was to initially just ban it, or to just like say, let's hit pause, or let's address it as in the context of academic policies. But I haven't seen any like really significant adoption or use cases from many schools up to this point. There was a principal for one of our Boston public schools, Boston Latin Academy, he's a phenomenal school leader at creating partnerships with the community. And what he did is he leveraged his community partners to create an experience for his eighth graders to be able to go to MIT and to like explore this exhibit on biases in AI. But that was really like the first use case I've seen. One thing that I've been trying really hard to get some of my school leaders and some of the colleagues that I know is to like adopt some of Alex, Cotran's and the AI
Yeah.
projects curriculum in there, because I think it's such a super low lift way to be able to start talking about this in schools that doesn't require a lot of work. I know when I was a teacher, I was always looking for 5 to 10 minute starters that I could use as an icebreaker to get the day. I think the AI education projects curriculum is awesome. I mean, I've spent a lot of time just looking through the lessons and playing around. It's very thoughtful. You could tell it was made by educators for educators. Like anybody who looks at the PowerPoints and the lessons that they have could tell that. So if I was running a school, the first very low lift thing I would do was probably give that folder to all of my teachers and say, hey, if you want to, do 5 to 10 minute, sentence starters or warm ups with your students, this is a great way. This is here for you. So you don't have to think about it. You can just implement it, right? I think the more we can adopt low hanging fruit for our schools to be able to
Mhm.
leverage tools like that, they're more likely to do it versus, having to bring in some significant product. That's always been my issue with technology and education, right? Is that it's so complicated. It usually falls on the teachers to implement it, and they're always the one that get burned, right? And so that's why I've always usually been very frustrated. But what I really like about AI is the barrier to entry is very low. Like, I mean, it took me literally 30 seconds to log into ChatGPT, type a question, and it just use it, right? There's no added complexity there. And so I'm cautiously optimistic about the ability to implement this large scale into schools without a lot of the significant barriers that we sometimes see when we try to implement all of these cool nifty little gadgets in education that we think are going to significantly enhance the experience, and then they ultimately don't, right? And so I think that's where my initial head case is. I'm hoping that this summer a lot of the contacts in the schools that I
Yeah.
work with are going to have very meaningful conversations about how and then to what extent they are going to consider leveraging AI tools within their classroom moving forward, maybe even as soon as next year. The thing that I've also been approached by a few different organizations out there run by educators that are now starting to pop up around potentially doing some AI consulting, doing some AI tools, and trying to connect those partnerships with schools. So I have some hope for those types of organizations as well. My hope is that they can actually help bridge the gap between this AI technology and teaching educators in a very simplistic, streamlined way. So again, it doesn't fall on all of these educators who don't have the time, the bandwidth, or the determination for somebody like me or you to do all of this research, to create a podcast, to
Mhm.
find people to do all of these things. And it'll be an easier experience for them, given everything that they hold as people who work in schools with kids.
No, most definitely. And I agree with you on everything that you mentioned there. And I think that's something that's very important. And I think we will see that change. I mean, right now, everything, at least I want to think that at least in my area, kind of things slow down a little bit because we are in state testing season.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's just focused on all of that. But hopefully, like you mentioned, over the summer and then leading up into this next year, we can have those conversations because it is important that we have those conversations with all stakeholders, all the way from the superintendent all the way to teachers, and even maybe even get a student panel on there and just to see what it is that we can do together collectively and how we can either use this technology and how to use it and use it in a way that's going to be efficient not only for the teacher but also for students, and in a way that you're still preparing them in with that digital literacy, digital citizenship aspect of it. Obviously talking about the privacy issues, which is something that is huge. That one of my, and I think I did share one of my papers that I did for my one of my doctoral studies, and where I was just kind of feel myself like just being in the middle. Like, I'm here all for the AI, but then I'm also very cautious. And as far as all the other stuff that we can have some bad actors that it just takes something very little to do those things. And right now, one of the big things is just people replicating their voices or replicating voices and calling people and trying to scam them out of money. So now they're like, hey, families, make sure that you have like a code word or a password or something, so that you're really speaking to your family member and so on. So those are kind of like the bad actors that I see. But in my case, I see that this, number one, if there's ever a tool that can be out there that's going to give teachers some time back. I mean, we know that teachers have so much on their plate. And every time that I do a training with teachers, no matter what the tool, I always look to see, hey, if I can give you 5-10 minutes just to just take a breather sometimes and just
Mm-hmm.
decompress, I think that's a win. But with something like this that can help already not have to reinvent the wheel, but take what they already have and enhance it in such a way for students of different levels, no matter what supports the students may need, and have a tool that can help, put that together. It's just something that is amazing. I did want to share here also as well, and I did post a thread on this today, but there was an article. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share it. I'm not sure if you saw the article today. I know it was released yesterday, but it's really talking here about. Let me bring it up. There we go. It says most teachers now approve of students using ChatGPT, and nearly all are using the program themselves. So it was a very interesting read. So I'm just going to share here a couple of statistics here where the key findings say 95% of teachers are aware of ChatGPT, 98% of teachers use ChatGPT, 79% approve of student use, 84% of teachers that approve of its use have spent time teaching their students how to use it. 35% believe most or all of their students turn in assignments where they used ChatGPT to complete, and 71% say their school doesn't have a policy surrounding ChatGPT use. So some very interesting statistics. Now, one of the things though that I do want to mention is I think that this was a very short little study. I think it says from March 30th to April 4th, and it was a total of 1,000 US high school teachers as well as undergraduate and graduate professors that were surveyed in that sampling. So, I mean, but we do see some numbers here where people are getting a little bit more comfortable. I think that initial state of fear has already, subsided some. At least at my university, when my professor talked to us, like I mentioned, he was like, "We know that this is out there, and if I have to call you in just like either for a meeting, then we'll just talk about what it is that you wrote and maybe just have you rewrite those. But there isn't an official policy of stating like, hey, if you do this, it's an automatic like failure and so on." One of the things that I loved that you mentioned, and I know it was on one of your recent podcasts too, because I remember driving, was about the college paper. Are we writing for knowledge, or are we writing just for stamina? What is it? So tell us a little bit about that, as if you can, please.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I will say that I don't know that this is my novel idea necessarily. I've had some really great educators come onto my show. Big shout out to Keith Risbin and Spencer Burrows who have been on, and I think they there was generally some alignment between our perspectives there, which is we society and education is a little bit different now in the world we live in now than even what it was in the 80s and the 90s, right? And how technology has developed in the world. What's very interesting about the economy and the experience that our young people live in now is there's just so much more information, access to information, and information is being produced at such a pace that like people can't just really keep up with it, right? And that just wasn't the case in the 80s, the 90s, etc. And so what we're now seeing, at least from my perspective, is we have put so much emphasis in the K to 12 experience up to this point on producing unique original thought in certain capacities through a product like the college essay as an example, or just essays in general. And when it was kind of deduced that this thing could write an essay in a matter of seconds, there was a lot of reaction of like, well, no, this is, how can we not have an essay? If you can't have an essay, how can people learn? And, my just reaction to that is there's a lot of different ways you can learn besides writing an essay, right? And the economy that we live in, at least in the work that I do, I oftentimes don't find myself writing essays, but there's a lot of other really deep level thinking and critical skills that I'm asked to do. I'm asked to compare things, to analyze things, to interrogate things, right? To juxtapose things that don't make sense, to draw connections, to make hypotheses in a very complex world, right? And we're now entering a society where rather than creation, students are really being asked to be masters of curation, right? Really being asked to be able to draw from a lot of sources with having, the world's technology at the brim of a thumb, right? And now it's really becoming more important to be able to create ideas from a lot of different places and to create unique original thoughts based on your ability to interact with the world's knowledge and the world's information. So that was kind of my perspective on it. It's not to say that I don't think essays are totally obsolete or they're not important, but I think the overemphasis that we had on the traditional 5-paragraph essay with intro, 3 body paragraphs, conclusion, I think that that's not really setting up kids for the world that they're going to inherit, right? If the world is saying this is the way that it works now, these are the things that students need to do, then we need to adopt, right? We don't need to suggest that this is the only way to learn or how to do things. We need to adapt to the way that the world continues to evolve, the way technology continues to evolve. And we need to remind ourselves that when you look at, again, Bloom's taxonomy, it doesn't just say create, right? And create doesn't just mean an essay. There's a lot of ways you can create, right? And so that was just kind of my take on that piece.
Yeah, and I'm very big on that too, as well as I'm a year away from finishing my doctoral studies, and obviously there's the dissertation. I've never been a fan of writing, and I've even asked. I was like, "Hey, is there anything else that I could do, like a capstone, a project?" Because I'm with you. Like I've always been one of those. Like there's other ways to measure that knowledge. Now I understand that traditionally this is what has always been done, where it's always like 100+ page paper or 150+ page, and that's the way it's always been done. But I've always been one of those, like, the this is the way it's always been done approach. Sometimes we got to think outside the box. And I was actually at a conference last Friday, or this past Friday, the Excellence in Online Learning Conference, and I was talking to a professor there. And I was talking to her about, dissertation and everything. I said, there are better ways, at least of not having to write, but still showing that knowledge, that we can be creative. We can create something that's a learning artifact. I mean, if we can't get to that final curation point based on all the knowledge that has been taken in from all of our professors, then you can see, like, okay, there's a huge misconception here, there's a disconnect. But for the most part, you're taking in everything that you have researched, and you are creating something that doesn't, can have, multimodal, where you can write a little bit of it, but then create either a presentation, or you're actually creating a solution and things of that sort, where you can go ahead and submit that. And very much like yourself, it's very unusual that even in our work, where we're trying to find a solution, we're writing essays at all whatsoever. It's always an artifact that you're going ahead and submit, maybe like a portfolio, or you've got like a proposal where you do have to do some writing, but you have a presentation that ties to it. So I'm kind of with you on that, where we can find different ways of checking for learning and checking for understanding, other than just, 150
Yeah.
page paper. Because I'm thinking to myself, I was like, maybe if a lot of professors are scared, like, oh my gosh, how do we know? And then that's another thing too. Imagine having that conversation also in elementary or even junior high. You've got 30 kids per class, and then chasing kids around, like, because you're putting these papers in through Turnitin, which I have found and tried Turnitin. And even on some of my papers where I've written, on my own, it'll still flag for AI, and so I'm just thinking to myself, imagine those teachers that really are diehard and say, no, this is what Turnitin said, I'm going to fail you, or we're
Yeah.
going to have those conversations, or hear referrals. So now you've got 90 referrals all day long, or 90 zeros all day long. You have to start thinking to yourself, like, hey, is this technology really working, or is it not? Because there's some teachers that may not even ask. They're just like, hey, this is what it said, and this is what I'm putting in the grade book, and this is why I'm calling your parents. So what are your thoughts on that, as far as, also that those maybe those educators that really are just saying, no, this is turned in, this is good, this is going to be the solution, and we're going to go ahead and stop all cheating with this.
Yeah. I think it's just really, it's again, it's I have tremendous compassion for those folks. And I would say again, it's just really tough to be a teacher in a public school, or mind you, maybe even a private school. I've
Mhm.
never had an experience working in private K to 12, so I can't suggest that in America today. And I think there's just so many competing tensions and priorities, right? You as a teacher may have aspirations to do A, B, and C with your students in their class, help them to like really put that light and the fire in their eyes, help them to be passionate and a fire about something. And then on the very end of that spectrum or that dichotomy is the obligation to the standards and the tests and the coverage and the material and some of those things. And so I have felt that. I know what it feels like to be like, I really don't want to teach poetry today, but I have to like keep on track. I really would like to teach ABC, but I kind of have to do those things because I need a job, right? I have to like work and I have to do these things. And so I think the teachers who are really able to juggle both of those hats are truly just, wow. I mean, you're great. You're better than I am at doing it because I tried really hard. And it's a very challenging balance to keep. So I would first just say I have compassion for them. And then I would just offer an alternative perspective to that and say, for most teachers that I know, myself included, the reason we got into teaching is because we wanted to uh, inspire kids. We wanted to put that flicker into their eye where we saw them being successful at something, and we wanted them to understand more about the world around them and to find their purpose, right? That I think is the reason why at least most of the educators I know, myself included, got into the game. And so if you if writing an essay for some students accomplishes that goal, whether it's through the topic that it's on, whether it's maybe the flexibility you gave them as a teacher to say, well, screw the 5 paragraph, write it the way that you want, write it using the words that you want, write it as if it is a poem, if that puts that light in your eyes, right? Write it the way that really makes you happy, whether it's a totally different format. Like you said, if I was a teacher today, honestly, you know what I would do? I would ask my students to create a podcast episode. It's really hard to do, and it's
Mhm.
fun, and I think they would enjoy that much more. But it's still learning, and it's still creative thought, and you have to be very thoughtful about the way you put together your ideas. So there's still learning involved. But I think ultimately, if walking away from that assignment or that experience, students are coming with away with a deeper understanding, they're refining critical life skills that they need to understand, then you've done a good job, right? At the end of the day, not all of our students are going to be Pulitzer Prize winning authors, but maybe they don't want to do that. Maybe that's not their calling. And so I think just, trying to fight up against students on things such as, plagiarism and some of those things. It's not to say that if a student blatantly is turning in
Yeah.
something that is clear from that you should just accept that. And not at all. You need to have that conversation and say, like, why aren't you trying? Why don't you care? But if a student really cares and everybody's like doing their best, I think I especially in education today, where so many of our students are behind, they're still recovering from the pandemic and trying to just get back into this no flow. I just have such compassion for everybody right now going through this experience, and I think anything we can do to put a flicker in a teacher or a student's eye about an assignment, let's lean into that, because we haven't had as much of that in the last 3 years. And education, in my eyes, is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be about learning. It's supposed to be about doing things that puts that fire in our heart, and whatever we can do in whatever format makes sense, like, let's do that. That's what I think.
Excellent. I agree with you 100%. Thank you so much for sharing that, Daniel. And again, thank you so much for today. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your insight. And most importantly, too, I really appreciate, again, as always, I mentioned it before, I really appreciate the work that you are doing. Again, I love listening to your podcast every Monday morning. I'm like, all right, I already know what's up. And then I get, to hear you, and then your amazing guests as well that I've learned so much from, and just seeing things from different perspectives as well. So think that's very important, having those, that there's very different spaces, although we are in the same education space, but those conversations differ from group to group, and of course level to level. And but it's great that those conversations are being had. But before we go, Daniel, I know I've been sharing it, on during here on the in the chat and everything, but before we go, can you please let our audience members know how they may be able to connect with you on social media, and how they can go ahead and connect with your podcast as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if folks are interested in listening to the podcast right now, we're in most places you can listen to podcasts. We're on Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, some of the big ones there. Feel free to give me a tweet or a message at the AI Ed Convo. I always respond to folks who have questions, or have things that they want to ask me there. And then as well, you can feel free to add me on LinkedIn. You regularly check LinkedIn as well, if that's something that you enjoy working with. Any of those things, I always love talking with folks about education, at the intersection between AI and education, any of those things. So any way that I can help try to make somebody's life easier and share what I know, happy to do so. And again, just thanks everybody for tuning in today, and just hearing a little bit of what I had to say.
Excellent. And here is Daniel's page, the AI Education Conversation at the AI Ed Convo. So make sure you follow him on Twitter. Make sure you also go ahead and click this fabulous link here for Anchor, and it'll take you straight to the podcast. And you can definitely listen to it on Spotify. And I believe every Monday morning, that's where I'm getting my AI fix too, as well, and getting things from different perspectives. So please make sure that you do follow along, because it is a great, great podcast. And Daniel really pours himself into this, and really just sharing some amazing information week in and week out. So Daniel, congratulations again on episode 13. And here's to another 200 episodes and a million downloads, my friend. Just keep doing what you're doing and be consistent. But before we go, Daniel, here is my favorite segment, and I know it's Josh's favorite segment, because he's like, "Hey, the 3 questions fonts," and so he wants to know, what is the crypto. So, Daniel, question number one: in the current state of AI, what would you say is your current AI kryptonite?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say for the obvious one there is, again, I just don't have a technological background. Like, I don't have a programming background, and so I'm doing the best I can to really understand how these tools work on the back end when I hear terms such as natural language processing, machine learning, large language model. I'm like, what the heck are some of those things? And so I've had to work really hard to just kind of understand my simple brain, like how some of those things operate. And so I always really appreciate when I'm also able to talk with folks with a very different perspective from mine in the technological field, who can kind of break down how some of these things work for me, because I'm coming at this from an educator perspective. My mission is to really try to make these things make sense for people who think like I do, versus the programmers or the tech people who understand this stuff in their sleep.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, great answer there, Daniel. All right, Daniel, question number 2 is, if you could have a billboard with anything on it, anything, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I would say it would probably say find your passion. And I think the reason there, I mean, it's pretty obvious, which is I just think the way the world works right now, I think there's just so many young people who feel lost. They feel sad or deflated, especially after the last couple of years. And I really think that it can be really scary sometimes to follow that light in your heart, take a risk and do something new that you didn't know you could do. Or maybe you just haven't found that thing yet in your life. But I just feel like if everybody in the world would work harder at just doing the thing that they really cared about and doing the thing that they felt like they were being called to do, that inner voice, I just think the world would be a lot better place. And so, I really would just, ask everybody, young people, but also folks who've been out of education for a while. Like, I mean, take a risk. It's scary. I mean, I was scared to start this podcast, but something in my heart just said, like, I got to do this. I believe, like, something is telling me I got to do this. And I was scared and I was worried. And I don't know that the first episode was all that great with my editing, but I've learned a lot on the way. And it's like I'm starting to build momentum. And so just, the life is too short to be worried about what other people think about you. And you just got to go do it. Just listen to your heart, find your passion.
Excellent. That is some great advice, Daniel. Thank you so much. And here we go. We've got Josh here with a comment says, "Ask Fawn's a good one." All right. So, question number 3, Daniel, is, let's say that this was your podcast this evening and I had the opportunity to be your guest. What might be one question you'd like to ask me?
Yeah, I mean, I was asking you it earlier and you didn't answer it, so I'm definitely going to ask you now. Which is, so I mean, obviously, it's been really great to be in this space with you and to learn from you. And you're much further along in this journey that I have, and it just feels great to talk to somebody who actually knows what I'm going through, as someone who's on this podcast journey. And I'm just really curious to know, like, why did you start your podcast? Like, what kind of compelled you to go through this journey? Now, I think you'd mentioned you're over 2 years in the game. Like, how did you? What drew you to this?
Yeah. Well, actually, very similar to you. Actually, we were shut down already. It was after March, when everything shut down. So I was working from home, and I had the opportunity to connect with other educators in my space, and I'm talking about global educators. I mean, this was the global Google educator group. And you had people from Mexico, UK, Australia, and everything. And so, since we were all on this journey together, as Google level 1, level 2 trainers and so on, we started doing this live streaming, how to use certain apps, give teachers tips and so on. So then I said, you know what, I want to start doing that on my own. And that was the intention. However, as the show kind of went on and on, I kind of strayed away a little bit, so much of just being ed tech, even though lately I know we've been talking because this is a hot topic, but it ended up being more of a conversational, of more like, how are you doing? How have you been? What are some of your struggles? And then I just became more interested in the stories that people share. And yes, sometimes there isn't any tech that we talk about, but we are talking about important things that do affect our educators within the space that we're working in, and content creators too, as well, that I invite. So April 10th of 2020, that was our very first episode. And April 10th of 2023, 3 years that we've been doing this, and we're getting closer to that 200 episode mark. And it's just been a great ride, being able to connect and have these types of conversations that sometimes many educators aren't having, because like you mentioned, sometimes as educators we work in silos. but at least through our podcasts and through our efforts, like you and I and all the other podcasters that are out there, we can go ahead and bring in these conversations to their ears, learn new things, see things from different perspectives. And for me, it's just been about making that connection, connecting educators and creators one show at a time. And that's the way that I met Josh. Josh was a guest here on my show, and we've been connected since. And it's just, you make those friends and you continue to grow. So that really motivates me. And like you said, following your passion, and this is something that really fills my bucket and I'm really passionate about, which is sharing and elevating people's stories. Sometimes people may not have an opportunity to share, but being able to have a platform like this and say, hey, you're more than welcome to come and share on my platform, that's the best part. But like I said, that's really what compelled me to start. And slowly, organically, it just started being more of me and not just focusing on the ad tech, but just focusing on those conversations that need to be had at that given time. So yeah, man. So I just encourage you, keep doing what you're doing, stay consistent, and you're doing phenomenal right now. I'll tell you what, and I'm saying this out here in public and everything. At 13 episodes, you are already a lot better than I was at probably 99 episodes. So keep doing what you're doing. You definitely have built some great momentum, and I've become a huge fan. So you're definitely doing something great. So thank you so much for that question. And thank you so much, Daniel, again, for being an amazing guest. And like I tell all my guests here, once you are a guest on the show, you always have an open invite. So anytime you have some big news, anytime you just say, hey, Fonz, I've got some amazing things that I want to share and I want to share it with a wider audience, you're more than welcome to contact me and you can come back and we will make that show happen. So you are part of the personal learning family. So thank you. I appreciate you. And for all our audience members that are joining us, we had Josh here. We had Sherry that was joining us here. And for all of you that are going to be rewatching or re-listening to this episode, as always, thank you so much for making My EdTech Life what it is today. We do what we do because we're passionate about just bringing these conversations into the education space. And of course, our mission is to connect educators and creators one show at a time. Please make sure that you visit us on YouTube. Make sure you give us a like, give us a thumbs up, give us a follow. Make sure that you follow us on all social media so all the AI and algorithms can start popping us into your feed. But as always, thank you so much for all the love and support. Make sure that you visit our website at myedtech.life, where you can check out this amazing episode and the other 192 amazing episodes with some amazing educators that you can go ahead and take some knowledge nuggets from, sprinkle them onto what you are already doing great. And if you would love to contribute to our mission, please stop by our merch store where you can get yourself a cap, a sweater, a shirt. Summer conference season is around the corner, so make sure you get yourself some nice My EdTech Life swag, or start prepping for winter conference season once the next school year starts. Whatever the case is, that all goes back to the show so we can continue doing what we are doing. And as always, my friends, don't forget, until next time, stay techie.